Chloe, a 55-year-old woman, had been alone at home for 2 weeks since her husband, Carlos, left on a business trip. The house they had shared now seemed larger than ever. The silence was only broken by the constant, irritating drip coming from the kitchen. The leak had been persistent for weeks, and she had finally decided to call a plumber. When Charles arrived, with his firm stance and determined steps, Chloe couldn't help but smile slightly as she saw him enter. He was young, robust, with an expression that mixed focus and calm. His strong arms were visible, and she noticed his calloused hands, evidence of his hard work. "Good morning, Mrs. Chloe. Where's the problem?" he asked in a polite but practical tone. The scent of his woody cologne filled the room, blending with the faint jasmine perfume she used to wear. "It's the kitchen sink. It's been leaking for a while. I think it needs some adjustment." Chloe led him to the spot, but her eyes couldn't seem to move away from the man in front of her. Something within her, a feeling long forgotten, began to stir slowly and silently, like embers being reignited. Charles crouched down, inspecting the pipes. The metallic sound of his tools echoed through the kitchen, and Chloe, distracted, watched every movement intently. He worked with skill, his muscles tensing beneath his skin as he adjusted the screws and tested the connections. While he was focused, Chloe let out a soft, suggestive laugh. "It looks like you have all the right tools for the job," she said, her gaze lingering on Charles a moment longer than necessary. He stopped, surprised by the comment, and looked up, noticing for the first time the sparkle in her eyes. A subtle smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I do what I can," he replied, but something in his expression suggested he was beginning to realize that her comment wasn't just about the plumbing. The air in the kitchen seemed thicker, and Chloe's heart started to race. It had been so long since she felt that spark. The desire, so long suppressed, began to surface. The look she gave Charles this time was bolder, but what she was about to propose could change everything. The silence between them became palpable until she finally said something that would make Charles's heart race like never before. "Charles, I know this is a bit unusual, but could you help me with something else?" If you're enjoying this story and want to find out exactly what kind of help Chloe asked Charles for, stay until the end of this video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our content. Chloe said each word slowly, each syllable carrying a hint of hidden intentions. Charles, still partially bent over, looked up at her, intrigued. His face showed a mix of surprise and curiosity, but there was a subtlety in Chloe's gaze that he couldn't ignore. "Sure, Mrs. Chloe. What's it about?" His voice carried a tone of professionalism, but there was something in the atmosphere that he also felt. Something unspoken but present. Chloe hesitated for a second, feeling her heart race. I feel so lonely here, with this huge, silent house. Sometimes all we need is some company, you know?" She looked at him with an unexpected intensity, as if revealing more than she intended. Charles straightened up, sensing that the conversation was taking an unexpected turn. The silence between them became palpable, and he felt his body respond to the proximity. "I understand, Mrs. Chloe," he said, his voice a little lower, almost a whisper. He felt the air around him change, something new, exciting, and dangerous. "If you need anything, you know you can count on me. For anything." Chloe bit her lip, as if considering her options, and then finally smiled. "It's good to know I can count on you." She took a step closer, her body almost touching his. "I was thinking, it's been so long since I've felt a touch. A simple touch can change so much, don't you think?" For a moment, Charles remained still. Her words echoed in his mind, loaded with a tension he couldn't ignore. He knew he was entering delicate territory. His eyes dropped to Chloe's lips, and for a moment, he felt the temptation to do something that he knew could change everything. Chloe lightly touched his arm, her fingers brushing against the warm skin. The touch was simple but laden with meaning. "Do you mind?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Charles took a deep breath, the air feeling heavier now. He knew this wasn't just about fixing a plumbing problem. There was something more happening here, something that was pulling him in a direction he hadn't planned to go. But at that moment, something inside him gave in. No, Chloe. I don't mind. The next meeting happened a few days later. Chloe couldn't stop thinking about Charles, about how that simple touch had awakened something in her. It was as if the veil of loneliness that had enveloped her began to dissipate, replaced by a desire she hadn't felt since her husband left. She called him back to check the plumbing again. When he arrived, the tension between them was palpable, and this time, the playful banter and hints started earlier. Chloe was more confident, knowing that there was something in Charles that was also interested in exploring that connection. "Did you come with all your tools again, Charles?" Chloe said with a teasing smile. Charles smiled back, this time without the formality of before. "Always ready for the job, Mrs. Chloe." As he worked, Chloe moved closer once again, this time staying very close to him. Their bodies were almost touching, and she let her fingers slide down his arm, more boldly than in their last encounter. Charles paused for a moment, his eyes locked on hers. "It seems like you're always solving my problems, Charles, but I think this one is harder to fix." Charles gave a sidelong smile. "And what might this problem be, Mrs. Chloe?" "Loneliness," she replied, her voice soft but loaded with meaning. Before he could respond, Chloe leaned in and gently kissed his lips. It was a quick kiss, but full of promises. They pulled apart for a moment, both breathing faster. "That wasn't something I expected," he said, his voice low. "Neither did I, Charles," she replied with a smile. "But I'm enjoying it." By the third meeting, the atmosphere between them was already charged with tension. Chloe knew she was playing with fire, but she couldn't stop. Her desire for Charles grew with each encounter, and their flirtations became bolder. They met at a cafe near her home, away from familiar eyes. Sitting at the table, their touches became more frequent. Chloe caressed his hand on the table, her gaze fixed on his eyes, as if challenging him to make the next move. "Charles, you know I want more than words, don't you?" He nodded with a restrained smile. "And what do you want, Chloe?" She leaned in, whispering in his ear. "I want the same as before, but this time without hurry." Her lips lightly brushed his skin, sending shivers down his spine. They both knew that the next step wouldn't be just an exchange of words or a casual flirtation. At the end of the meeting, Chloe kissed him again, this time with more intensity and no rush. The sensation of his lips on hers seemed to ignite something even deeper. They both knew that this was only the beginning of something they could no longer control. A few days later, Chloe invited Charles to come back to her house. The pretext of the repair no longer made sense, but he accepted. This time, both of them knew that there were no more barriers to keep, and that what would follow would seal their fate. As soon as he entered, Chloe pulled him close, their bodies pressed against each other. The warmth she felt being so close to him was intoxicating. They didn't say a word, as the silence between them spoke louder than any conversation. Chloe led Charles to the bedroom, where the lights were dim, and the tension in the air felt suffocating. She closed the door behind her and turned, looking at Charles with an expression full of desire and hesitation. She knew that this was the moment where there would be no turning back, and adrenaline surged through her veins. Without wasting any time, Charles pulled her to him, enveloping her in a deep kiss, filled with passion that had been held back for so long. Their touches began slowly, each movement deliberate, as if they were savoring every second. Charles's hands explored Chloe's body with tenderness, while she guided him with soft whispers and silent requests. The heat between them grew until neither of them could resist any longer. At the peak of their encounter, Chloe felt every sensation with an intensity she hadn't experienced in a long time. Charles's touch made her forget everything around her, and in that moment, the rest of the world vanished. It was a moment charged with emotion and deep connection. In the days following the encounter, Chloe couldn't escape the growing sense of guilt that seeped into her thoughts. She knew that her husband, though distant, might notice a change in her behavior when he returned home. The guilt weighed heavier each day, and the silent tension between them seemed to increase daily. Chloe began to worry about the possibility of being discovered. Charles, on the other hand, seemed more at ease but also noticed her unease. One day, during a brief call with Charles, he asked, "Are you okay? You seem distant." I'm confused. Charles. It's consuming me. I wanted this so much, but now I don't know what to do. Her voice was trembling, and Charles realized that the weight of the betrayal was starting to affect her deeply. "You knew it wouldn't be easy, Chloe, but it was your choice too." His response was firm, but there was a hint of concern in his voice. She knew he was right. The betrayal had been a conscious choice, driven by Chloe's uncontrollable desire. But now, facing the consequences, Chloe wasn't sure if she could handle it all. Time passed, and Chloe felt the weight of guilt growing. She began to avoid Charles, fearing that each meeting would further increase the risk of being discovered. Her husband, upon returning home, began to notice small changes in her behavior. Chloe was more distant, quieter, and he started to question what was happening. One day, while Chloe was distracted at home, her husband came home early from work without warning. Upon entering, he found Chloe's phone on the table with a message from Charles flashing on the screen asking, "Can we meet today?" Chloe's heart raced as she saw her husband holding the phone and reading the message. The look of suspicion he gave her was enough for her to know there was no longer a way to hide the truth. "Who is Charles?" His voice was calm, but she could feel the contained fury. "What do you think Chloe should do now? Will she be able to hide the affair, or will everything be revealed? And Charles, will he play a more significant role in her life?" Leave your comment and share your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, like the video, and see you in the next story.